Welcome to The Explainer. I'm thrilled you're joining us today because, wow, we are looking at something truly monumental. We're going to unpack the historic May 2025 dissolution of the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party. And we'll be exploring the massive, far-reaching geopolitical ripples this is creating all across the Middle East. We are literally talking about the potential end of one of the region's longest-running modern conflicts, and, the incredible complexities of turning that potential peace into a lasting reality on the ground.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've got a structured roadmap for today, moving from military history to deep sociological ideology and finally, regional geopolitical forecasting. So we'll be covering the end of an era, ideology beyond the battlefield, the science of women, the Kandil Mountains vacuum, 4 future scenarios, and finally, the high stakes for peace.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the end of an era. 40,000. Just take a second to process that number. This staggering figure represents the estimated casualties since the armed insurgency between the Turkish state and the PKK first began back in 1984. For literally decades, this conflict has exacted a tremendous human toll. It's created massive economic costs and sowed incredibly deep political and social divisions, particularly in Turkey's southeast and across those rugged mountainous borders of Iraq and Iran. And this brilliantly illustrates just how fast things can change. After 40 years of grinding conflict, the landscape has shifted incredibly rapidly. Back in October 2024, nationalist leader Devlet Bahçeli made this totally surprise suggestion. He proposed that imprisoned PKK founder Abdullah Öcalan could actually address the Turkish parliament to call for an end to the insurgency. Then, in February 2025, Öcalan made the historic call for the PKK to dissolve and disarm. Fast forward to May 2025, during their 12th conference, the PKK officially adopted a resolution to disband its armed struggle. The acceleration of this peace process is frankly nothing short of historic.
Which brings us to Section 2, ideology beyond the battlefield. Now, to really understand this, we have to look at the profound ideological shift driving the Kurdish movement. Back in the late 1970s, the PKK's origins were deeply rooted in a rigid Marxist-Leninist ideology, with the very strict goal of creating an independent socialist Kurdish state. But over the decades, inspired heavily by the writings of Abdullah Öcalan while he was in prison, the movement fundamentally evolved. They completely abandoned the rigid goal of drawing new state borders. Instead, they shifted toward what they called democratic confederalism. This is essentially a focus on grassroots, horizontal social networks, local communes, and really overcoming mental and social oppression rather than simply fighting a class war.
That perfectly sets up Section 3, the science of women. So the crucial point here is a concept called genealogy. Translating literally to the science or study of women, it combines the Kurdish word jin with the Greek logos. This concept is the movement's radical alternative to both the patriarchal state and mainstream Western feminism. Basically, they argue that traditional social sciences are androcentric, meaning they're dominated by a male perspective, and that mainstream Western feminism often fails to effectively challenge the underlying capitalist structures of society. Within this philosophy, women are viewed historically as the first colony. Öcalan and the movement's theorists argue that the nation-state, capitalism, and patriarchy are inextricably linked together. So the core idea is that true social liberation is entirely impossible without first achieving a mental transformation regarding gender. For them, breaking down the dominant patriarchal mentality is the absolute prerequisite for freeing the rest of society. It's an incredibly comprehensive worldview, and it directly drives their political organization. Let's zoom back out to the macro level for Section 4, the Kandil Mountains vacuum. Because this leaves us with a multi-million-dollar geopolitical question. Who exactly fills the vacuum in the Kandil Mountains? For decades, the PKK has controlled hundreds of Kurdish towns and vast swaths of rugged terrain here, an area they call the median protection areas. With the PKK formally standing down, a massive, highly strategic power vacuum is opening up, and as we know, geopolitics absolutely abhors a vacuum. Now, complicating this transition is a massive number, 136. That is roughly the number of military bases and observation posts Turkish troops have established as of early 2025. They've deeply infiltrated Iraqi territory to fight the PKK, pushing up to 40 kilometers inside the Kurdistan region border. So you don't just have the PKK leaving, you have an entrenched Turkish military presence that heavily complicates who exactly takes over the administration of this region. Plus, actually handing over this region is an absolute logistical nightmare. The The Condal Mountains contain Iraq's highest peaks, and over the decades, the PKK has built a vast, highly sophisticated underground network. We're talking deep tunnels and fortifications holding strategic arsenals, everything from small arms to air defense systems and medium-range missiles. Verifiably dismantling and surrendering this hidden infrastructure is a monumental challenge for any potential peace agreement. So, where do we go from here? Let's move to Section 5, 4 future scenarios. Let's see how this builds. The Emirates Policy Center actually outlines 4 distinct potential realities for the ground ahead. We've got integration into the official Kurdistan region, a trilateral coordination of forces, the area becoming a base for other armed factions, or a continued symbolic presence of the PKK. Let's rapidly fire through these. Okay, so the first scenario, which is considered the most plausible, involves gradually handing administrative and security control over to the official Kurdistan Regional Government, or the KRG. But here's the catch. The PKK deeply distrusts rival Kurdish factions and is very hesitant to surrender weapons to them. The second scenario envisions trilateral coordination. This would mean Turkish forces maintaining a security corridor alongside Iraqi border guards and the KRG. However, a permanent Turkish military footprint inside Iraq is highly controversial, and it would for sure face massive political blowback from Baghdad and neighboring Iran. Now, a much more dangerous alternative is Scenario 3, a complete security vacuum. This could allow extremist groups, like ISIS remnants or Iranian-backed militias, including the PKK's own Iranian offshoot, PKK, to just swoop in and seize those underground fortresses. Alternatively, in a fourth scenario, the PKK could maintain a purely symbolic presence. Unarmed militants and leaders could just remain in the mountains in a sort of self-imposed exile, waiting to see if Turkey actually follows through on the peace process, because they might be unwilling to return for fear of prosecution. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, High Stakes for Peace. The current stalemate really boils down to a fundamental dispute over sequencing, basically who goes first. Ankara is taking a hard line. The PKK must fully surrender their weapons and empty out those mountain arsenals before the Turkish parliament will enact any legal reforms to protect or integrate former militants. But the PKK outright refuses to disarm first. They argue that giving up their weapons without legally binding guarantees against prosecution leaves their members completely defenseless. It is an incredibly tense standoff fueled by mutual distrust. And remember, this peace process isn't happening in a vacuum. Turkish officials are deeply concerned that the ongoing instability of the broader Iran war could encourage renewed militant activity or empower hardliners who oppose the settlement. The stakes seriously couldn't be higher. We are watching the potential end to one of the longest-running armed conflicts in modern history. But with deeply entrenched mistrust and a region engulfed in chaos, we have to ask, can this fragile, historic peace process actually survive? It's a question that will absolutely define the geopolitical future of the Middle East. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep questioning what's on the horizon.